as Craig described, this training will attempt to cover the documentation that is required for ESG projects that are doing either homelessness prevention or rapid rehousing components. We will not talk about coordinated entry, the coordinated entry requirements, the referral process, how all of that interface with between ESG and coordinated entry is supposed to work. We've talked about that at the last couple of meetings, and obviously we'll continue to enhance that process over the next few months. Happily, the district office staff has been trained in ESG eligibility and should be starting to refer people to ESG through coordinated entry shortly, obviously as they identify eligible clients, with more clients expected as once the eviction moratoria end. So this, as you are all aware, ESG has 4 components: street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention. As I just mentioned, this session today is going to cover documentation requirements for only the latter 2, rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. As we'll see, those 2, the activities and the requirements for those 2 are very similar, with the main difference only being who is eligible to be served by those 2 components, while street outreach and emergency shelter have very different activities and different requirements. So we won't be referring to them at all after this slide. So in both cases, homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing is used to stabilize participants in permanent housing, with the really the only difference being who is eligible to be served. Homeless prevention takes people who are not currently homeless, but rather at risk of homelessness, will become homeless soon unless they are served by ESG, and prevents them from becoming homeless. And they can either stay in their current housing and remain housed, or be housed in new permanent housing, moved from where they are now and housed in a new housing using ESG activities. While rapid rehousing also stabilizes people in permanent housing, but does so for people that are literally homeless now, and therefore they are moved into only moved into new permanent housing. Therefore, the eligible participants for the 2 components are different. Almost everything else about the 2 components is the same, except for who may be served. As alluded to, homelessness prevention activities can only be used to serve individuals that are at risk of homelessness, have very low or extremely low income, and lack the resources and support networks to remain out of shelter without ESG assistance. So they must be at risk of homelessness, which means they must have one of the 5 indicated conditions affecting them. They have to be pending an eviction within 21 days, doubled up living in someone else's housing, living in overcrowded housing. That means by HUD definition, or at least for ESG purposes, more than 1.5 persons per room. They may have moved twice in the last 2 months, or they may be fleeing domestic violence. Any one of those 5 conditions is sufficient to establish at risk of homelessness. And then for the homelessness prevention component, they also must have 30 income that is at or below 30% area median income. Though for ESG CV projects, that limit was raised to 50% area median income. And then finally, they must lack sufficient resources or support networks to keep them from becoming homeless. The rapid rehousing component, conversely, only requires participants to be currently homeless. And that means they are living in an emergency shelter for homeless persons, living in a transitional housing for homeless persons, which in Westchester, almost all of the transitional housing are EHAP units, living on the streets, of course, and fleeing DV. All right. So before your ESG project can enroll a new participant, you need to document that they meet those the eligible those categories and have that written documentation of eligibility in the client file. So for homelessness prevention, then you are documenting all 3 things, both that they meet one of the at-risk categories, that they have income at or below the thresholds, and that they lack sufficient resources. So we'll look at all 3 of those items in order. This first slide shows the documentation needed to document the 5 at-risk categories. You'll need at least one of these documentations in the client file. Pending eviction within 21 days, you need a written notice that the landlord is demanding that they leave the apartment within the next 21 days, or that they have a scheduled eviction hearing within the next 21 days. Doubled up living in another household housing, you will want to obtain a written attestation from either the owner of the housing, or if it's a apartment being leased, from the leaseholder, saying that the participant is staying with them temporarily. Overcrowded housing, you'll want to create a comparison between the number of persons staying in the unit and the number of rooms. Obviously, that will show that there are more than, that the ratio is 1.5 or greater. Importantly, this is all rooms, not just bedrooms. So you would include kitchen, dining room, living room, other rooms. You do not include bathrooms or hallways in this calculation. However, it's all rooms that people live in.
Okay.
Obviously, moved 2 times in the last 60 days. A self-certification is sufficient. So if you can obtain some kind of documentation, moving receipts or other, that would be even better. And then, of course, fleeing DV, the optimal documentation is certification from a victim service provider. In Westchester County, those are Hope Store and My Sister's Place, but a self-certification from the participant, especially using the HUD form designated for that purpose, is okay too. All right. So this slide shows the income limits that are currently in place for Westchester County. 50% AMI and 30% AMI. There are different limits, as you are all aware, for different family sizes. And once you have obtained documentation of income, of course, you then need to show that you have compared their income to the income limit to document that the income limit is below the threshold, at or below the threshold. So is the Word document now visible?
No.
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 Okay, so I got to transfer it. Thank you. Sure. Now?
Yes.
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 Okay, great. Thank you. Provided among the packet of forms provided, I think, yesterday is a monthly budget sheet developed by cluster and then modified to document the income threshold for ESG projects. It allows you to add up income from all sources, monthly income from all sources, and then total that into a gross income that can be compared either to 30% AMI or 50% AMI using the chart at the bottom of the page. Happily, that chart shows monthly income, not annual income threshold, so that you can compare the monthly income that you've totaled directly to the monthly income limits. And then this sheet can also be used to compare income to expenses as for use with beginning to help the client with budgeting and for housing stability moving forward. All right. The third component of documenting eligibility for homelessness prevention component projects is that the household lacks sufficient resources or support networks to prevent them from becoming homeless, that they would be homeless without ESG assistance. And also sent to you yesterday is the client resource checklist that you can use to have the complete and have the client sign to certify that last part of homelessness prevention eligibility. I'll open and share that. All right, I assume that's visible now. This is a short checklist that shows various, make sure that especially that gathers information from the client about their current resources. Do they have money saved or family that can help or that they can move in with? Assuming that all of those are no, especially the sixth one, which directly certifies that they don't have resources or support networks to prevent themselves from becoming homeless, they have then certified that they meet that third category, third criteria, perhaps, for homelessness prevention eligibility. All right, conversely, as we mentioned earlier, rapid rehousing eligibility documentation is simpler, perhaps, that there's only one criteria, that is that the household is currently homeless. And so the only documentation needed is written document showing that the person was homeless the night before they were enrolled in ESG. For homeless that are in emergency shelters or transitional housing projects located in Westchester, you can either obtain print out the HMIS records for that household, showing a check-in in the shelter the night before they were enrolled in ESG, or of course a written letter on letterhead from the shelter or transitional housing provider showing that they exited the shelter the day that they entered the ESG rapid rehousing. And for currently homeless on the streets, since HUD allows proof that there was an outreach contact with the person living on the street within the same calendar month that they were entered in ESG. It does not need to be the night before. It can be the same calendar month, but either way, you can either, and similarly, use HMIS records of that outreach contact or a letter or form filled out by the outreach worker. Okay, for both homelessness prevention, so those are differences. The eligibility documentation are different between homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing. Almost everything else is the same. For both projects, after you establish eligibility at enrollment, but you must reevaluate eligibility every 3 months. And the eligibility that must be documented is similar to what was done for homelessness prevention at the beginning. You have to show that the income for the household continues to meet the eligibility threshold. If it's ESG CV project, the income must be at or below 50% AMI, and or for ESG 30% area median income, and that the household continues to lack resources and support to retain their housing without ESG assistance. And obviously, you can continue to use the same forms used by homelessness prevention projects at entry to continue to show that those criteria are met every 3 months that they're enrolled. Obviously, if their only short-term assistance is given, so that the household is enrolled less than 3 months, this isn't relevant. And as we'll discuss, there are documents that are done at entry that then need to be updated. The permanent housing retention plan and updated at every 3 months. The permanent housing retention plan and the calculating the client portion of rent for where they're getting ongoing rental assistance. I mentioned them here because they also need to be done every 3 months. We'll talk about those very soon in more detail. All right, so as you, this should hopefully look familiar. This is the activities that are allowable under both homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing components. They are, as we've alluded to, identical. In both cases, the rental arrears, up to 6 months of rental arrears can be provided to the client, and rental assistance can up to 24 months. And the 24 months is a inclusive total that both arrears plus rental assistance have a combined maximum of 24 months. So if 4 months of arrears are paid, then the maximum ongoing rental assistance that is possible is 20 months, for instance. And then financial assistance, which includes rental apartment application fees, security deposits up to 2 months rent, security deposit, utility payments, utility arrears, and assistance with moving costs are all eligible. One important thing to remember is security deposits do not count up for the 24-month limit. So even if you provide a 2-month security deposit, you can still give the full 24 months of rental assistance. And then supportive services, staff time include case management, housing search, mediation, budgeting skills, and legal services. You'll notice I highlighted case management services. That's because for all clients, case management, no matter what other services, combination of other activities that they receive, all clients who are enrolled in either homelessness prevention or rapid rehousing must receive case management. It's not optional. They must receive case management in addition to everything else that they receive. And we'll talk on the slide after next. We'll look at exactly what HUD means by the case management is required for everyone. Briefly, I'll point out that ESG-CV did add a number of additional eligible activities that are not eligible under normal ESG. These are probably the 3 most important or most relevant. I won't say that, but I shouldn't say that, but most relevant to homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing. Maybe most exciting is the landlord incentives that are allowed under ESG-CV. And as I highlighted there, a signing bonus of up to 3 months of rent can be given to the landlord who accepts an ESG client into their apartment, or continues to have an ESG client stay with them if if a homelessness prevention household isn't being moved. That obviously can be a big incentive for landlords to offer housing to ESG recipients, ESG participants. Masks and hand sanitizer, and also COVID PPE can be purchased for client ESG-CV participants. And then finally, household furniture and household furnishings like cleaning supplies and appliances can be bought for participant use with ESG funds, but HUD has clarified that they can only continue to keep what is bought while they are enrolled in ESG. So that makes this provision much less attractive, much less useful. If a couch is bought for an ESG participant, it has to be taken back when they are exited from the program. So temporary items, buying cleaning supplies or other things that get used up is probably the best use, maybe the best use of this new eligible activity under ESG-CV. All right, case management requirements. So I've on this slide, I cut and pasted the HUD guidance directly about case management. As highlighted there, the case manager must meet with the client not less than once per month while they are enrolled in ESG. That means that they meet at when they are enrolled, and then at least every month thereafter. Obviously, if a client receives, very temporary assistance, just receives arrears, or assistance with moving costs, a one-time payment, and is enrolled less than a month, they'll only receive the one case management session. But if they are enrolled more than 30 days, they should have a second case management session and monthly thereafter. And the two main activities that HUD wants case management to encompass are indicated there. They want the case manager to develop a permanent housing retention plan, so that the client is working towards becoming self-sufficient and stable in their permanent housing after ESG assistance ends. And the case manager should be assisting program participants to obtain non-ESG mainstream benefits, as indicated, like Medicaid, food stamps, unemployment, SSI, etc. All right, so because of that case management requirement, in addition to the eligibility documents that are obtained at project enrollment to show that the household is eligible to start receiving assistance, all ESG, homelessness prevention, and rapid rehousing case files should have the following three documents, and these should start showing up at entry, and then will be updated frequently. There should be documentation of that case management and other staff services provided, which means case notes that show that the case manager is doing what HUD wants case management to do. That is, that they are they're helping the client to implement the permanent housing retention plan, and that they are assisting the client to obtain mainstream benefits. They're also, of course, since all clients enrolled in ESG are entered into HMIS, there needs to be an HMIS release form, and a permanent housing retention plan should be created. And as we mentioned before, that is updated every 3 months when eligibility is reevaluated. So forms for HMIS should be release should be familiar to everyone, but it was provided to you. Was provided within the packet yesterday. This is the HMIS release. The primary client signs on the first page, and then all other household members are listed on the second page. The primary client doesn't need to be listed again on the second page. And the permanent housing retention plan form, share at least a example form was also sent yesterday that shows fields with the goals needed to become stable in permanent housing, and then the action steps needed to be taken over the next 3 months to reach those goals. And of course, the next plan update should be every 3 months, and then the participant and the case manager can sign. Okay, new share. All right. So the other forms that have been provided are among a constellation of about a dozen documents that must be obtained only if the ESG funding is used to provide housing. So if rental assistance or rental arrears is not provided, the ESG is only being used for financial assistance or services, case management, legal services, etc. These are not relevant. But if HUD is paying rent, either ongoing rental assistance or rental arrears, the rest of these documents must be present to prove that the HUD isn't paying for substandard housing and that the housing is not too expensive and fair. So there must be a lease between the client and the landlord, and obviously signed by both the client and the landlord, and the monthly rent must be at or below fair Westchester County fair market rent. This slide 15 shows the current FY 2022 FMR values for Westchester County for studios through 4 bedrooms. These went into effect October 1st, just last Friday, and you may notice they are slightly lower, about I think 3% lower than the FY 21 FMRs that expired at the end of September. So do note that the threshold is a little bit lower than it was. There also must be, in addition to the lease between the client and the landlord, what HUD calls a rental assistance agreement between the provider and the landlord. The lease allows the client to pay the landlord their share of the rent, but the rental assistance agreement is the contract that allows the assistance provider, which means your agencies, to pay the landlord HUD share, whether that is the rental arrears or ongoing rental assistance. So just like the lease, there's no, the rental assistance agreement doesn't have no required form, but there are a number of required elements. And among the packet that was distributed is a 2-page HUD guidance. Sharing now. That describes all of the elements of the rental assistance agreement. As you can see, this is required where rental assistance or rental arrears is being provided using ESG funds, and the rental assistance agreement should show that what allows that agreement to terminate, such as when the person is no longer part of the ESG project or moves out of that unit, what happens when there are late payments, what the client's share is, etc. So you should, if you aren't already doing so, obviously you'll need to develop a template for your use for a rental assistance agreement with landlords who are participating in the program that meets these requirements. Okay, lead-based paint. This is required for all HUD housing. And so, all right, this is a lead-based paint form. It shows that the apartment discloses any known lead-based paint hazards in the unit. Yeah, it needs to be signed by the client and the landlord and the provider agency. Importantly, this form, as Hud points out, does not abrogate or supersede any of the lead-based paint requirements, many lead-based paint requirements that under HUD, if there is a lead-based paint hazard, it still must be remediated if there is a child under 6 living in the unit.
So Tajay, I texted them, so that would say to me that Dr.
All right. Habitability standards, ESG does not need to meet HQS inspection standards. You can use HQS since HUD recognizes that as more stringent than habitability, but you can choose instead to use the habitability checklist, which is much shorter than HQS. It's really only a 1-page form with less than a dozen items. This form should be filled out for must be filled out for every apartment receiving ESG housing assistance. Obviously, all of the items should be approved and not deficient. Then you can check meets all above standards and enter in the recipient name, subrecipient name, which is your agency, and household participant name, and the address of being evaluated. Okay. While the rent is for a ESG assisted apartment is capped at FMR, reasonable, the rent must also be reasonable. It is possible that a rent is below FMR, but still not reasonable given the rent market conditions locally within that neighborhood. And so the reasonable rent certification, a certification of reasonable rent must be completed for every unit housing ESG participants using HUD funds. In the packet that you received, there was a blank reasonable rent form and also an annotated form that shows some instructions and tips of local problem areas that we've noticed over the last years when people complete the form. So please complete the ESG form. Keeping these instructions in mind. All the fields in the grid should be completed. There should be no blanks, obviously. Take special care looking at the amenities section, which has 3 rows, the unit amenities, site amenities, and neighborhood amenities. And then, of course, the payment standard, which is compared to the HUD unit rent to determine whether the rent is reasonable or not, is the average of the 3 comparison apartments. And then if the payment standard is equal to or greater than the HUD rent, then you can check that the rent is reasonable and sign and date the form. All right, occupancy agreement. There should be a agreement signed by the client and the provider agency outlining program rules and what's expected by both parties, so that the client understands the ESG program and what is expected to happen while they are a participant. And then finally, two HUD requirements for all housing: fair housing notices and VAWA compliance. Fair housing, there are 4 forms, 2 in English, 2 in Spanish that have been provided. They should be, they talk about fair housing rules as they apply in Westchester, that the person has the right to live anywhere, irrespective of any protected class. And these should be distributed to clients when they enroll, both of them, and initialed, so that initialed copies or signed copies by the client should be placed in the client folder to document that they did receive them. Obviously, they can retain their own copy, second copy if they would like. They should. And then finally, VAWA regulations make sure that the client understands that they cannot be evicted or discriminated against in their housing, whether or not they are a victim of domestic violence. And so there are 3 components to VAWA compliance that apply to ESG. All three are required. The first is the notice of occupancy rights, HUD Form 5380. This is several pages that outlines all of the provisions of the Violence Against Women Act that apply to, as they apply to HUD housing, and make sure that clients understand that they, if they are a victim of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, that cannot be a reason for them to be removed from their housing, either by the ESG provider or the landlord. And then there are 2 legal documents that implement that. There is a Lease Addendum that makes sure that the landlord promises that they will not violate the VAWA Act. Importantly, that must be signed by the tenant, who is the program participant, and the landlord, not the provider agency. This lease addendum is signed by the tenant and the landlord, and the sublease addendum is signed by the participant and the ESG housing provider. So they're both separately in these 2 different documents. The ESG provider and the landlord promise to follow the HUD regulations that implement the Violence Against Women Act. Right. So again, those 11 documents are only required where rental assistance or rental arrears are being provided. But if they are, all of these should be in the client file, in addition to the documentation of eligibility and the documentation of case management and the re-evaluation documents every 3 months. All right, contact information if you have questions after today about these materials. Craig, well, Yoel Tarshun, Yoel Fiegel, and that's me, and Latanya Rosado. And are there any questions?
Yeah, Yoav, I have a question about the FMR.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't the FMR, wasn't that waived until the end of the year? Under ESG?
For ESG CV, for certain recipients that took advantage of the waiver, that have a written letter to the New York City field office implementing the waiver, the FMR may be waived. But I don't know if every recipient took advantage of that waiver, or if any did. So yes, that'll be your recipient should let you know if that waiver is in effect for your project. There would have to be something on file in the New York City field office implementing that waiver for that to apply.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.